Right.
All right. So the reading for this coming Sunday happens to include a little bit of one of the passages that's in our lesson for tonight, and then a little bit more of what comes after that from Mark's Gospel. On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening, after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages, that I may preach there also. For this purpose have I come." So he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening, after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases and drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages, that I may preach there also. For this purpose have I come." So he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee. On leaving the synagogue, Jesus entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law lay sick with a fever. They immediately told him about her. He approached, grasped her hand, and helped her up. Then the fever left her, and she waited on them. When it was evening, after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons. The whole town was gathered at the door. He cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he drove out many demons, not permitting them to speak because they knew him. Rising very early before dawn, he left and went off to a deserted place where he prayed. Simon and those who were with him pursued him, and on finding him said, "Everyone is looking for you." He told them, "Let us go on to the nearby villages, that I may preach there also. For this purpose have I come." So he went into their synagogues, preaching and driving out demons throughout the whole of Galilee.
Who's the gospel writer?
Mark.
Oh, that's Mark. Oh,
Kind of interesting when in this day and age, somebody gets sick, we distance ourselves and stuff, and now everybody gathers with all their issues, and it's just acceptable. It's just,
Well, it's kind of like the emergency room.
yeah, yeah, right.
Well, and he's gonna cure everyone, so you don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about getting sick because he's going to cure you right away,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So why did he deny them, healing or talking with more and going on to other places?
Well, his ministry was not just to Capernaum, which is
Right.
where Peter and Andrew and Peter's mother-in-law, and obviously Peter's wife, who is never mentioned in any of the gospels anywhere. So his ministry was to a wider area, so it's like, continuously through the gospels, we hear him talk about, well, let's go on to these other villages, or let's go here.
Make
let's go
sure
there.
everyone here.
Yeah. So it's, not the
Ministry,
ministry
right.
is to take place in just one location, but throughout the whole area.
What would we consider the demons that he drove out today?
Good question.
Yeah. It's not clear. Like leprosy, I think we talked about last time, that there was, what we now know is Hansen's disease, or whatever that term is leprosy, is not necessarily, whenever they're talking about lepers at his time, it's any type of skin disease is recorded as leprosy. So those possessed by demons are not necessarily somebody who needs an exorcism like what we have now, where the demon actually possesses the person. So it could be anybody who goes into convulsions that has some type of a health issue that causes that. So it could be multiple things that those people were suffering from, but it's always recognized as being possessed by a demon. But the
And it
demon may not have been an evil spirit. The demon might just be the disease that was
Mhm.
causing their convulsions.
Okay, so it would be something that was visible, that was happening with their body visibly, okay.
Any other thoughts on the gospel?
Well, when we talked about Jesus moving on and not staying in the same place, he had so many things that he wanted to accomplish, and that's why he ended up recruiting people to kind of help him, and that's what
Mhm.
we are to do too this day, but it's almost like he was fatigued and tired, but he needed help doing that, but he kept on moving.
And maybe a little advertising to go with this gospel passage. Father Paul likes to do communal anointing of the sick at least twice a year. So he has Todd look at the readings. And since this one has stories about healing, Todd recommended we do it this coming weekend when we've got this as the gospel, so. And anointing of the sick is not just for those that are physically ill, so it's anything that you would like to have that sacrament help you as far as whatever you might be dealing with. Please come forward at whichever mass you're at and take advantage of the sacrament of healing. So let's look at some of lesson 2 here. And there's parts that we're gonna skip because we're gonna deal with those when we get to the questions at the end. Unless we run out of time on the discussion prior to that. So this lesson is about women beneficiaries of Jesus' miracles. So miracles is a big part of everything we're gonna be talking about tonight. But over on page 33, kind of in the middle of that second column, biblical scholars have observed at least 3 key structural elements in any miracle story. 1, a description of the problem. 2, the miracle worker's word or action that affects the miracle. And 3, evidence that the miracle took place. So what do you make of those 3 elements as far as miracles go?
It makes logical sense that you'd have to have all those components in order to understand that something needed to happen, and then it did happen.
Those three elements are what the church uses in their canonization process. If there's someone that a diocese wants to promote their sainthood, they have to first of all name somebody that's called the postulator, the one that kind of pulls everything together, does all the documentation, and they submit that to the Vatican. And if the Vatican accepts it, first of all, the person has to be dead. You can't become a saint if you're still alive. That person then is called a servant of God. And the next step in the process is looking for a miracle. And provided there's a miracle, other than martyrs, miracles are not required for martyrs, but for other people to become saints. They look at proof of a miracle, and these same three things are what they look at. First of all, it has to be a person who is suffering from some disease, illness, something else going on with them that can clearly be shown that, yes, here is this problem. Secondly, it has to be clear that the person that you're trying to get canonized as a saint is the person whose intercession is being sought in only that person. So it's not like you can pray to a multitude of saints, because then it's like, okay, was it really this person that you're trying to get canonized that is the one that interceded? So it has to be very clear that there's one and only one person, and it's this individual that you're praying to. And then that third element, that evidence of the miracle, there has to be, if it's an illness or disease or something of that sort, doctors have to be able to say medically, there is no medical answer for what happened here. It truly is not because of any treatment that we were providing or any medication or anything else. It truly was something that cannot medically be explained. So those same three elements that we talk about here in scripture are what the church uses. And then, so once there's a miracle, then they become blessed, and then another miracle, and they can then be canonized as a saint. So if you see somebody that's being referred to, well, let's talk about the Knights of Columbus, the founder of the Knights of Columbus, Father Michael McGinney, is currently blessed because he's past that first step. And in fact, there's been stories in the Columbia, the Knights of Columbus magazine, about the individual boy who they say this was the miracle that got him to that step, and now they're waiting for another miracle that can truly be or clearly be attributed to Father McGinney. And if they find that, then he can be.
Can you relate that miracle? Do you know what the miracle was? Or any miracle?
Mm.
I don't know of any miracles. I mean, I've heard that there are, but I'm
It
kinda out
was
there.
some disease that this young boy had, and somewhere out east in Pennsylvania or Ohio, I think. Let me look it up here quick.
I mean, do you guys know of any clear? I mean, I wouldn't know what. I wouldn't know.
Well,
what
if
to do.
you're a hockey fan, the 1980 Olympics, do you believe in miracles?
Why not?
Oops, that's not what I want.
So when you mentioned a doctor, but would it have to be a witness or witnessed?
There has to be. If somebody is in the hospital and they've got congestive heart failure, and the doctor says it's just a matter of time before they're gonna have a heart attack and die. And then all of a sudden the next morning, the doctor comes in and, oh, how you doing? "Oh, just feel perfect. I think I'm gonna go out and run a marathon or whatever." And they examine him, and there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever of any congestive heart failure anymore. So there has to be medical proof that whatever the health condition was no longer exists, and there's no medical answer for what happened.
Okay.
So let me get to the.
I thought it
next-
was 3 times. I thought they had to have 3 miracles before they were
Yeah,
canonized.
so there's, where there, after the first one, well, first of all, they're called the servant of God, then venerable after the first miracle, and then blessed after the second miracle, and then saint after the third miracle. So it's a
Okay, how did
process.
Saint Catherine become a
I was
saint?
just gonna ask. that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could go grab the book we got on her that would
Oh.
know all of those miracles,
mean-
but let me just look up Father
Mm,
McGivney.
Maybe
here.
I shouldn't have even asked. I mean. it
No,
kinda-
that's
No, it's a
very
good question. It's a good question.
The only bad question is the one that isn't asked.
Oh, I know. True, 'cause
I was
then-
at a gala at a Little Sisters of the Poor, the Little Sisters of the Poor. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the whole situation, but there was a couple there that the man had been healed. And I can't remember who the person was that was going to be canonized, but he was evidence of the fact that he had an illness and he was cured. And so, and had prayed to this man and must have died and prayed to him to be healed
Mm.
and was healed. But I can't remember the whole situation. I remember the couple and that he was healed. I always wonder, why is Mary Blessed Virgin Mary and not Saint Mary?
Well, what do we say in the Eucharistic prayer at the end when we talk about Mary?
I don't know.
The next thing is Blessed Joseph, her most chaste spouse,
Oh,
but we recognize
him as a saint, yeah.
Joseph as a saint. And my hometown parish was, well, Assumption, but, or commonly called Saint Mary's. So Mary is a saint, but we use blessed in a different context, referring to her than the blessed as somebody who's in the canonization process.
Okay, okay.
Okay, here's it. The miracle recognized as coming through Father McGivney's intercession involved an unborn child in the United States who in 2015 was healed in utero of a life-threatening condition after prayers by his family to Father McGivney.
Oh,
Wow,
ooh, gives you goosebumps.
Yep.
yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, and just think, that mommy could have had an abortion,
Yep.
you know?
Yeah,
Or a child with a severe illness of some
You know,
kind.
but that's how they justify
Oh,
abortion,
okay.
because
Yes.
oh, it's gonna be.
but you never can say that the doctors can say the situation, but until the baby's born, they really can't say if the baby will be born that incapable of living. They can't tell that really, I don't think. I suppose they're so sophisticated now with mechanisms, I suppose they can see better.
Regardless. Doesn't
Yeah.
count. That to me doesn't count. I have to be careful who I talk about this
You
stuff
can talk
because
about it.
people.
You're safe.
Okay, so for Catherine Drexel, she was beatified by Pope John Paul II on November 20th, 1988, when her first miracle through prayer, healing the severe ear infection of teenager Robert Gutherman in 1974 was accepted. She was canonized on October 1st, 2000, when her 1994 miracle of reversing congenital deafness in a 2-year-old Amy
Wow.
Wall.
Wow.
Mm.
Interesting, they're both for your hearing, huh?
What?
But they both were for, isn't that interesting that far? Well,
That's very
I
interesting.
didn't know that about her.
but no, when did you, 2000, so in 1994,
Yeah, so she was canonized in 2000, so
2000.
just when Father Paul was asked to found the parish, Archbishop Flynn had said he wanted the parish named after one of the recent female saints. And I can't remember who the other one was, but it was a name that Father Paul was not real excited about because what we would have been called, but Catherine Drexel, that, because that was in 2004, so it was just, less than 4 years after she had been canonized.
Mhm. What would we have been called?
I can't remember what the other saint's name was, but it was.
But it was something not called very,
Yeah, not an easily pronounced name. I
oh, okay.
remember that, but,
We would have massacred.
okay. Then we get.
Thank you for looking at it.
Story here of two miracles that are intertwined, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but the miracle that is first asked for, and then in the end of the story is granted is Jairus's daughter, and Jairus asks Jesus to come and heal her. Then Jairus is told, oh, she's died. Don't waste the master's time anymore. And he goes, no, she's just asleep. He raises her. But what it says in the bottom of page 36, top of page 37 in regards to that. The third element, evidence that the miracle has taken place, is found in the narrator's comments that the girl arose immediately and walked around. And in Jesus' command that the parents give the girl something to eat. After all, ghosts cannot eat food.
Yeah.
So to show that she was truly alive again, he asked that she eat. What is another story that we have in the Gospels that also involves someone who had been dead and then eats?
Did Lazarus eat?
Now in Lazarus, it was unbind him and let him go is the command, but there's nothing about eating
Eating.
in Lazarus story. Somebody a little bit more famous than Lazarus.
Oh my gosh.
What did you say?
I said, oh my gosh.
Oh. I thought you said, oh my God, and you would have been right.
Ah,
Used to sing with the
Yeah, Jesus.
Jesus.
So let's go
When did God eat? When did Jesus eat? Are you
Well, he
talking
ate-
about Jesus?
He ate at McDonald's. And then I think we went to Pizza Hut a couple of times.
What did you have for supper tonight?
Broccoli cheese soup.
Ooh.
All right, so let's look at the first of those, and that's chapter 24 of Luke. And if somebody wants to read verses 36 to 43.
Say that again.
Chapter 24, verses 36 to 43.
Of Mark,
Luke.
of Luke. Oh, sorry. You guys found it. Go ahead and start reading.
What? Oh, I'm sorry, what is? what is it?
Chapter 24, verses 36 to 43.
That was 26. The appearance to the disciples in Jerusalem. While they were still speaking about this, he stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." But they were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. Then he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do questions arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, because a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you can see I have." And as he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While they were still incredulous for joy and were amazed, he asked them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of baked fish. He took it and ate it in front of them.
So there we have, again, Jesus talking about, got the flesh, I'm not a ghost, and then another step further. Haven't had anything to eat in 3 days, I'm hungry.
I was on a long journey.
And then let's go to John chapter 21. And verses 1 to 14.
After this, Jesus appeared once more to his disciples at Lake Tiberias. This is how it happened. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael, and the one from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples of Jesus were all together. Simon Peter said to the others, "I am going fishing." "We will come with you," they told him. So they went out in a boat, but all that night they did not catch a thing. As the sun was rising, Jesus stood at the water's edge, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Then he asked them, "Young men, haven't you caught anything?" "Not a thing," they answered. He said to them, "Throw your net out on the right side of the boat, and you will catch some." So they threw the net out and could not pull it back in because they had caught so many fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Peter heard that it was the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken his clothes off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples came to shore in the boat, pulling the net full of fish. They were not very far from land, about 100 yards away. When they stepped ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and some bread. Then Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net ashore full of big fish, 153 in all. Even though there were so many, still the net did not tear. Jesus said to them, "Come and eat." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. So Jesus went over, took the bread, and gave it to them. He did the same with the fish. This then was the 3rd time Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from death.
So here we have 2 stories after Jesus' resurrection where he is eating, showing that he's not a ghost, that he is truly risen.
I've been to that spot.
Have you?
I have, it's my favorite spot, the Sea of Galilee, where he cooked. There's like a chapel there, and monks take care of that chapel. And just to be there and touch the pebbles was the most moving of my trip to Israel. My favorite spot.
Did you have Peter's fish while you were there? One of the common things that they'll do is give you a boat ride, and they'll actually cast a net to show you how they would have been fishing at the time of Peter, Andrew, and James and John, the fishermen. And then there's a restaurant that serves what's called Peter fish. So there's 153 fish they caught. There's some of them
Yeah.
still left over.
And in the freezer.
But the fish is served whole. Head.
With the head and tail.
Everything's still on it, which the last time we were there. There was, what, 22 of us or however many it was. I think there were only 3 of us that ordered the fish that, because they give you that,
Yeah.
getting the fillet or something else. It's like, you can get that back in
Yeah.
Twin Cities, you don't,
I
can't
did
get
go-
Peter's fish
No,
here, you know,
no.
take advantage of it.
We did go out in the boat, and that was moving to the Sea of Galilee. We did prayers and scripture readings out there. It was very moving to see and to be there.
What year did you go, Dottie?
I'm trying to think, it was before COVID. Must have been like 2016,
Oh,
something like that. And the evidence of guns, when we went to the wall,
Mhm.
we were told not to wear crosses or anything, and had to have skirts on, no shorts.
And you had to go to the women's section.
Yes, and when we came through this device, like when you're at the airport, that kind of a
Mhm.
device. And then seated right in front of you is someone with a machine gun in his lap,
Oh,
you
wow.
know, military. And then you go down the steps, and another really moving place was where Jesus preached. There were some renovated stones, and then there were some that were original, you know, and they were warped, and it was very hot. And just to picture him preaching there. And you've gone twice.
Yep.
Wow.
The first time, we were there in October and got back late October, just before All Saints Day. And we had celebrated mass at all these different locations, including
Yep.
The Mount of the Beatitudes, where in Matthew's Gospel, Sermon on the Mount was given from there. So I had proclaimed the gospel from where Jesus supposedly had given it. Then All Saints Day, the gospel is the Beatitudes. I had the hardest time I've ever had reading a gospel, because I just had visions as I was trying to read this of standing there on that mountain, looking out at the Sea of Galilee and down the hillside where the crowds would have been. And I need to look at the words, stop visioning what you
Yeah.
just experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah, if any of you have never been to the Holy Land, it's just a tremendous experience.
Mhm.
See these actual places where things occurred, or where we think they occurred.
Mhm.
And I think there's at least two different places where they said the baptism of Jesus took place, and other things, even the tomb. There's the garden tomb, which some people think this is where Jesus was buried, where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which has both. You've got these steps to where they feel Golgotha actually was.
Yeah.
And you can reach down into a hole where this is where Jesus' cross had been
Oh.
placed, and then you go down to which actually was a church, but it's now inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where the actual, or what they say is the actual tomb that Jesus was laid in.
Has any of that been, any of that been ruined from the conflicts of now? Are they bombed or any of that area?
The majority of what's going on is in Gaza, which is south of Jerusalem and west of the Dead Sea and west of Jericho. So an area where Jesus probably never really actually was. The West Bank, where Bethlehem is completely shut off now, and there is stuff going on in that area, but not the same type of destruction that is occurring in Gaza. But most of the holy sites are around the Sea of Galilee and Jerusalem, which are all Israeli territory that's not part of Palestinian territory. The one that's in the north is the Golan Heights, but again, Jesus would have not been there or been there very little. So there's not really any sacred sites in the Golan Heights, but there is in Bethlehem. But that's the only Palestinian territory where there's any holy sites, and it's just strictly the church where they feel this is where the actual birth took place, and then the Shepherd's Field. Those are the two sites in Bethlehem Oh, and then Rachel's tomb.
I wonder how long it will be before it is safe to do that again.
Go back here to the
Oh,
book of Joshua.
oh,
There's been constant conflict from the time of that writing, which was roughly 1200 BC
BC,
and continuing till today.
the
So,
Gaza Strip,
no, that whole
the
area.
whole area.
You know, Gaza is when we hear about the Philistines fighting the Israelis. Gaza is the area where the Philistines actually ended up
Okay,
settling. So the other areas that they were fighting in, the Hebrew people were able to conquer all of those, but Gaza is the area where the Philistines ended up. Okay, we talked here about the girl being told to get something to eat. And as I mentioned, that story is one where there's another miracle intertwined with it. So we've got Jairus coming, asking that his daughter be healed. And as Jesus is on his way, this woman with a hemorrhage approaches him, and she is then healed. And then Jesus gets to Jairus's house and raises his daughter. There's a lot of common themes, common things in those two stories, which is one of the reasons why they're intertwined. What are some of the things that are common between those two stories?
Oh, wait a second. Where is it?
Is there, because there's a crowd in both, I mean, she comes and there's all these people around Jesus and she touches his
Yeah.
cloak, and then the soldier, the people are all grieving for the girl to be dead. So there are a lot of people in that situation too.
Yeah, so a lot of people present to both question and witness.
Isn't there a question about that in here?
I heard a deacon talk on, on the TV and about the story, because of yesterday, the 30th was that story. And he said, if I heard what he said correctly, he said that the woman was treated first before the rich man's daughter. I don't know if that's a common thing, but it was like the poor are more important to Jesus than the rich man. Do you see that in that story? I mean, did I hear what he said correctly? No.
There's nothing that indicates that she was poor.
Well, she was, in the sense that it sounded like she was rich at one point or had money to go to the doctors. But after 12 years, she had no husband, she had no son, she had no one to help her, and all of her money was gone. And so she was there alone, and Jesus healed her before but he was on his way to heal the girl. But I heard the deacon say, to me, it sounded like he was saying that Jesus put the poor person ahead of, maybe not.
Randy, do you mean when page 36, where they're talking about the one woman had bled for so long that she never had an opportunity to be married and produce children.
Yeah,
And now this young girl is dying. She's 12. So
right.
she chance to be a mother.
Yeah.
So how old is she?
Well,
She is 12, and the woman was suffering for 12 years.
Yeah,
Oh,
so there's
okay.
another
I missed
commonality,
that.
12.
I missed that.
And in numerology, what is 12?
Oh, something about perfection or. See, they told us that.
Mhm.
Oh, I don't know about numerology. I know a little, but not.
Yeah,
I don't know where that was.
What is 12?
yeah, so. Yeah, so
12 disciples.
Yeah.
that's kind of completeness or perfection, so.
Oh. Okay.
And there's also reference to daughter in both stories. A lot of commonality in those two that are interspersed. Then we get the story of the Syrophoenician woman.
You say that so easily.
Yeah.
True.
I just skip over it. You're not alone.
Is that a Greek word or
Yes,
Greek?
so what's going on in this story?
Talking about his fame spreading.
So who
Even
is
to a
this?
non-Jewish areas.
Yeah.
Yep, so they're in Tyre and Sidon, which are, well, here it's just Tyre, but later we're gonna see Tyre and Sidon that are Gentile areas. So he's an area of non-Jews. So what else is happening here?
Oh, about avoiding the paparazzi. He needed some privacy, it says.
Yeah, I didn't want people to notice him.
But what is she asking for?
To have the demon driven out of her daughter.
And does Jesus say, yeah, sure, you betcha?
No,
No.
he talks about let the children be fed first.
Yeah,
And then who are the children?
the Jewish people.
Jewish, yeah.
Oh, got it.
And then what's the discussion about after that?
She says, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's scraps. So kind of pointing out.
That's kind of odd because it's really calling the people dogs. The people that are not Jewish, almost.
But that was what they were referenced as, because dogs were not a clean animal. And Gentiles being non-Jews were not considered ritually clean. So do you think that Jesus was really intending to deny her wish?
No,
What's he really doing here?
He's testing her
Testing her
to
faith.
see if she
is
has
the-
enough faith, it says, yeah.
And does she show that she has faith, that she puts her trust in Jesus?
Rich kind of answers them back. think he just wanted confirmation that confirmation that she was kind of on the right path. She was patient to hear what he had to say and then came back with her own justification.
But it says that was Jesus testing her to see if she had enough faith to have her daughter healed.
Mhm.
And it says, if this is what Mark intended, perhaps this woman is teaching Jesus about his own ministry. What do you think?
But it also says that Jesus came to understand that God's healing power should not be restricted to the Jews alone, but is available to all humanity.
Right.
I think it shows the generosity of Jesus in letting her say what she needed to say, or
Mhm.
felt like she wanted to say, and then coming back in a loving and kind way towards her by healing her daughter. I think he's just so powerful in the whole situation that he knows what she's gonna say, and she says it, and then he says, this is good. She's got everything straight, I think.
But she was never identified by name, correct?
Women
We don't
we get-
know.
That funny name.
Women don't get names.
Yep.
That's one thing you will notice in all of these stories of the women being healed. None of them are named.
You have a better idea of Simon's wife, Peter's wife, when you watch The Chosen. Don't you have
Mhm.
a good sense of
Yes.
his wife there? If you have
Yes.
not watched it, have you watched it?
Yes,
You-
most of it.
Okay,
I think they did a good portrayal.
you have not.
I don't watch those things because of stuff like what you just said. That's fiction. I mean, there's absolutely nothing to base in. We know that Peter had a wife because he had a mother-in-law. But
Yeah.
what is that story? It's something that somebody is creating.
But
Embellishing a little
Yeah.
bit.
But it gives the person who cannot connect
Right.
and does not have a lot of background, it actually puts more reality in who Jesus was. I mean, I can tell you that watching that has made Jesus a real person to me. And I can say the word Jesus. I mean, as a kid, it was kind of like, it was like this glorified word, and you didn't say it. Now I think of Jesus as a person, and you should watch it.
Maybe it's against,
It's
I've
superficial to
tried-
you, I
yeah,
know.
Yeah, I've tried watching
know.
some of those in the past when I start seeing what they're doing, it's like. Another example of that is. The church that's on 96 right off 10 in Vadnais Heights, I can't remember what it is.
Yes, I
They
know.
do a passion play.
yes,
And
North Heights.
next week, we're gonna be talking about the Samaritan woman. Well, when they are doing that play, there's a Samaritan woman at the well with a crowd around. We're gonna talk more about that next week, but there was no crowd there. Noon, when nobody went to the well because she was an outcast. And it's
I
like,
read that came
you're
up.
missing the whole symbolism of Jesus meeting her at the well at noon by having a crowd there. And it's, so that's why I don't like those
Oh,
things. They're throwing in
okay.
things that,
They go overboard on that.
yeah, and
I
it's
I
like,
went to it once.
just tell the story the way the story
Yes.
is. You don't need to embellish it
Right.
with stuff you're making
Right.
up.
Right.
I do like their portrayal of the disciples and how he gathers them one at a time. The tax collector, you know, a robber, you know, the different people that he gathers, you know, could be any one of us as a different kind of
Right.
person. And how he grooms them, teaches them, and prepares them. And it's at the point now where he's telling them, go out, take nothing with you. And I like that kind of, because I can find that right here.
Mhm.
So I like that, and I think it's teaching people that would never open this.
Yes, yes,
Um,
that's right. And you know, you can, if you watch something like that, I mean, that's why I keep coming back to this, because it is making me more aware of what is not superficial and what is really here. And I mean, I can understand how I mean, you've got so much information and you're so educated on all of this stuff that it seems kind of trite, maybe. And, but for those of us who don't have much connection to this thing,
Commoners.
yeah, I find it very,
It's kind of the
helpful to
same
me.
thing as the docudramas. So they're doing a documentary movie on some individual or some event, but it's called a drama because they're adding other things into it. And it's like, just tell the story. The
Right,
story's
right.
powerful enough. You don't need all
Absolutely.
these side romantic things or this or
Right.
that or the other thing that just kind of throws the whole story off, and it's adding something that a
Yeah.
writer wants included, but
right, well, and to get minds to watch, to, that aren't sophisticated, you know, really about a lot of things, so, okay.
They did
I
a
get
good
it.
job of the story we just read about the fishermen not being able to get any fish, and
Yeah.
then seeing him and saying, you know, to cast your net on the other side. And that he had that fire going to feed them. Again, food, the connection of food.
so here we have this carpenter telling fishermen how to fish.
Right. It's little cute scenes of him being a carpenter and the kids coming and them knowing the Lord's Prayer and.
You can choose something. It's kind of like reading the Bible and studying. We don't know for sure. Things that they say somebody lives to 100 and something years
Yeah.
old.
Right.
And I'm like you, what I can believe, what I've learned, not everything is exact, but just to remind and refresh your mind with what. I
Yes.
know what you're saying there, yeah.
Well, even between the Gospels, we see
Yeah.
differences.
Right.
Because of the time that they were and who was
Who
writing
they're-
them.
Who they're writing it for and
Mhm.
right, all of it.
we are fortunate.
So with the cure of Simon's mother-in-law, we mentioned before that she's not named, nor is there any reference anywhere to Peter's wife. But what does his mother-in-law do after Jesus heals her?
She serves them.
Waits on them. She gets up and waits on them and gets food ready for them, and
And what was the role of women at the time of Jesus?
Be the
Subservient.
homemaker,
Mhm.
do those
Take-
things.
care of the men.
Yeah, so when we go back to what we talked about last week with the culture, where it was more in relationships and expectations and stuff. To show that she was truly healed, she went back to what she was
Normally we
expected to do.
Right.
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
day-to-day, responsibilities were. So again, that's the proof of a miracle is, yeah, she was restored to what she had been. Then we go to a story in Luke's gospel, and this is the raising of the widow's son. What would this woman's situation be? When Jesus encounters this funeral procession?
No husband, no son, no money.
Mhm.
Her future would be very bleak.
Mhm. So Jesus raising her son not only gives her son back to her, it gives her life back to her.
Mhm.
Role of a woman at that time was to be a wife and to give birth to sons that can carry on the husband's business, the property, whatever possessions or wealth that they had. So with no husband and no son to pass that on to, she would be a nobody. And as it says in the end, she would end up having to beg or do even worse things in order to simply survive, so. And this miracle giving her both both her son back, but also giving her life back, that she can go on living the way she had when her son was still alive before his death. Oh, in Luke's gospel, he frequently will have stories of a man and a woman intertwined, or not intertwined, but following one another. So the bottom of page 39, biblical scholars have observed that Luke tends to pair a story that has a man as one of its major characters with a story that has a woman as a major character. So let's look at some of those. And we don't need to read the full passages, but we'll just kind of look to see the different stories. So let's go to chapter 4 of Luke. And if we look at verses 38 and 39, we get the story that we started our session with from Mark's gospel, but here's Luke's version of the cure of Simon's mother-in-law. But what comes just before the story of this woman?
Do you want somebody to read it?
No, just what's the story that comes just before it?
A man with an evil spirit.
So here we've got story of a man with an evil spirit, followed by story of healing of a woman. So that
Oh, contrast.
showing man and woman stories together. Now let's look at the story that we just had you, the raising of the widow's son. So chapter 7 of Luke, and that's verses 11 to 17 there, but what comes just prior to that?
Healing of the centurion's slave.
All right, so another story about a man, followed by a story about a woman. And then one more, which is the story we looked at earlier in Luke's gospel, and that's in chapter 8. I mean, what we looked at in Mark's gospel is the verses 40 to 56. So at the beginning of that, who is it that's coming to Jesus?
Leading woman and restores a girl to life. Is that, are you talking Luke or did I miss?
Yeah, Luke chapter 8, and verses 40 to 56. So at the beginning of of that? Who's coming to Jesus?
Jarius.
All right, and then what comes in the
Woman.
middle of that story?
Woman of the hymn with the hemorrhage.
So again, we've got
And
story of the man followed by a story of a woman, so. Luke's gospel, there's more stories and more references to women than probably the other three gospels combined.
And then he sends out the 12 disciples.
And then the last story there is the curing of the crippled woman, but when did that occur?
On the Sabbath.
And is that a no-no?
That's a no-no.
Yeah, right.
Well, let's go back to the first passage we looked at tonight. Not the first passage, the gospel we looked at tonight. That's what it was. So Jesus leaves the synagogue. So what day would he have been in the synagogue?
On the Sabbath.
He heals his mother-in-law. Then the fever left her and she waited on him. The next sentence, when it was evening after sunset, they brought to him all who were ill or possessed by demons.
ah,
So what does sunset signify?
The next day.
Yeah, the end of the Sabbath. So they're waiting until the Sabbath ends before they bring people to him to be healed. And that's what Jesus is getting in trouble here in 13 of Luke by in the synagogue on the Sabbath, healing this woman. And throughout the Gospels, there's more references to what Jesus does on the Sabbath that, according to the scribes and Pharisees, is prohibited, but he always has an answer for him as to why it's okay to do what he did.
They take care of their animals on the Sabbath,
Yeah.
so he
But
can.
it's true
he can
Because
do-
what
Yeah.
he does is he just says you're healed, or he just touches them or whatever. It's not like he's working or doing anything manual, really. So
Right.
it doesn't seem like it's something they should even be that upset about, because it's not like he's
Mhm.
doing anything.
But they're so narrow. I mean, they're
Yes.
so
They wanted,
focused on the law or what, that just makes me
they
so.
were, I think, so afraid of him taking over what,
Oh, Jesus,
yes,
yes,
that
yes.
they had to find something.
But don't you think they were just like that? That, I mean, they were just unmovable.
Yeah.
They were just not open-minded at all, just, this is the way it is, and
They were more concerned about man-made
They
laws.
didn't think taking care of their animals was work either. So, I mean,
right, well.
which he came back to them with that, you take care of your animals on the Sabbath.
But
And
for
so-
some things like making meals, they did it enough ahead so that they didn't have to do that on.
They
on
just had to
certain
set
days.
it out.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so like even the manna in the wilderness. On the day before the Sabbath, 2 days worth, where any
Yeah.
other day,
Yeah.
if you took extra, it was no good the next morning. but
Right.
They went together any
I
on the
forgot that.
Sabbath, but.
Yeah.
But, yeah, and that's why Jesus frequently is referring to the scribes and Pharisees as hypocrites. It's like they're kind of strict interpretation of the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law.
Yes.
So let's look at some of the questions for this week. So the first question, and you maybe notice that we skipped the whole first section of this lesson, and that's because it's addressed here in this question. What is your view of miracles? Have you witnessed or experienced a miracle? Describe in your own words the difference between curing a disease, a typical modern Western view, and healing an illness, the ancient Mediterranean view.
Well, I just thought curing a disease was eliminating the dysfunction. And healing was support provided for whatever separated an individual from the community, making their life meaningful and worth living. So it's not so much disease orientated as emotional and belonging and community.
There's a book called Small Steps. And it's about a young girl in Minnesota. I think she came from like a farm. And so it was a long way for her parents to drive to the Twin Cities. And she was at the University of Minnesota with polio. And later went to Sister Kenny. And she is able to function. This is a real thing. Not everyone in this room, she was 12. But not everyone in the, oh, they are 12. Ding, ding, ding. Not everyone in the room had the same maladies. Some couldn't walk at all. She had to learn to walk again. And Sister Kenny had developed some processes or exercises to help people with the paralysis from polio. And it talks, it goes through this story. It's a children's book, actually. My granddaughter read it. She's only 11. And my daughter wanted me to read it, and I've passed it on to someone I know that had polio. Not only she, but a brother and sister too. And they lived on a farm, and they live now in Ramsey, but that's a miracle, to me. That these people were able, they found some way of curing them or remediating or circumventing, because most people didn't get that kind of care and are in wheelchairs today.
And they've got that strength through, I mean, they accept it, and everybody else has kind of got compassion for them, feel bad for them. I had my mother-in-law, when she was living, came down with lupus, and then she ended up having kidney failure, and she was on dialysis and whatever. Very faithful woman, strong in her beliefs. And it was like 2 weeks after she was in the hospital, all of a sudden the doctors pulled the family together, and something happened that she didn't need dialysis anymore. It was just amazing. And while we were with her, she started speaking in tongues in the hospital, which I just didn't know. I've never seen that before. Didn't understand what it was all about. And she came home. I mean, wow, a miracle. I mean, when we talk about, when you asked that, I thought about, okay, Elaine, and she actually was so strong in her faith. She believed that the world was coming to an end and wanted the whole family to move to the mountains in Colorado. Half the family went. Bill and I started having our own family and didn't go, and she was so upset with us. In over time, everything, but it was just so strange. But going from dialysis, no, not needed, and diabetes, and that can be from weight and stuff that she may have had and things like that. But it was like the doctors were baffled.
How long did she live after that?
I think about 5 more years. At church like 3 times a day. So, I mean, she was just an amazing woman. Bought everybody in the family their own Bible and wrote. I still got what she wrote for me. I was going to have more kids than she.
No.
I had 2. That was it. We have big families, she was counting on that, though.
Mhm.
But when you think of miracles, you know, if that's what it was just strange, but.
Well, that's kind of impressive.
Mhm.
Let's move on to question 5, and that's the one where I sent out this. Comparison, so you have to flip between gospels to look at them. Compare Matthew's version of the healing of the foreign woman's daughter to Mark's version of the same story. Assuming that Mark's gospel was written first, make a list of the details Matthew retained from Mark's story. Make another list of details Matthew changed. And why might Matthew have made these choices? What effect do they have on how the story is read or interpreted?
I didn't do my homework on that one.
Well, go to the principal's office.
Mark over Matthew.
Well, they both went to the same place, I don't know how to pronounce it, Tyre.
Tire.
There.
They were both foreign women.
What'd you say?
They were both foreign women, not Jews.
Yeah,
And he drove demons out of both of them, right? Or out of the children.
Well, it's the same story, but
Different
that
version.
Matthew
Oh,
tells it a little different than what Mark did.
what was the question?
Just comparing
want
them
the
and
last
what is
You want the list of details Matthew changed. Is that right?
either added or changed and
Why?
what-
Matthew made.
it
Okay.
well,
does.
Matthew he said, Matthew was the one, that Jesus said he did not want anyone to know that he had gone into the house. And he mentioned a Canaanite, I think, if I'm pronouncing it right, Canaanite woman. Which was probably the same as the other meaning, but he mentioned that word, Canaan. And then David, son of the Lord, she said, David, son of the Lord. So it was showing that she knew who he was, who Jesus was. I thought Matthew's was a lot more interesting story. Mark's was very just straightforward, and Matthew made it more interesting.
I think Mark always included the women a little more than Matthew, is what just adding her to the story. And I'm finding out, reading between the two of them.
Well, one of the things that Matthew included that Mark did not was the disciples were saying to send her away,
Mhm.
and Mark didn't say any of that kind of stuff. Send her away, she's crying in distress. Also, she said, I think it was she said, have mercy on me. And I don't think Mark didn't say that. Or it wasn't said in Mark's. And what else did not note as much of a woman's nationality, did not call upon her, Greek, Syrophoenician, whatever. I didn't put all of that in there, just a Canaanite, and I don't really know how a Canaanite differs from all this more descriptive over
Yeah,
here.
it's the same.
Same,
So the land of Canaan would be where you get the Canaanite from, they're from the land of Canaan, but that's also when it's talking about Greek, that generally is a way of noting that somebody was Gentile as opposed to Jew. But the Syrophoenician, it would be basically the same as Canaanite, just a different way of.
oh. Now the woman was a Greek. Well, how can she be, Greeks are Gentiles?
Yeah, so when you see somebody referenced as a Greek, that's another way of saying they were a Gentile. So that, not that they were from Greece, but
Oh,
Um,
oh, yeah. How stupid of me. Well, okay, well, so now the woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like a description of what Greek is. You know
well,
what I mean?
Greek would be the way of saying she's Gentile. Syrophoenician would be the way of saying that she was a Canaanite, or where she's actually from in Gentile territory.
Oh, okay, all right.
Or is it just another way of saying she wasn't Jewish?
Yes, yeah,
Oh, okay. Okay,
because
okay.
being entire inside on, he's already in Gentile territory.
okay. So Matthew was not as specific about who she was. I guess that's the thing I picked out of there.
And he didn't want anyone to know he was there. He said that in both.
Yeah, what I was saying was just what Matthew, only what Matthew was saying that Mark did not. I mean,
Yep.
but there are a number of things that were the same.
So Matthew's gospel is written primarily for Jewish Christians, so those would have the Jewish background, where Mark and Luke's gospel are written for Gentiles, so that's why there's a little bit more in Mark's gospel. Showing that she was Gentile, so that Gentiles can look at Jesus can do things for Gentiles as well as Jews. Well, this particular thing I sent out comes from a book that's called Gospel Parallels. This particular version takes Matthew's gospel and goes from beginning to end in Matthew's gospel, but it'll be, here's the way Matthew tells this particular story. Here's Mark's version of the same thing and Luke's version of the same thing. So sometimes you can see the three line up exact, because Mark was written first and Matthew and Luke had Mark as a source, so sometimes they just took word for word what Mark had written, felt the same thing. But sometimes it'll be a little bit like what we saw here, where they may leave something out, change something, add something to it. So there are times where we get Mark's version, we'll see a bit of Mark in Matthew and Luke, but Matthew and Luke are basically identical. So it's a very interesting way of looking at gospel passages, and also you can see the different contexts. So it's like where Matthew is got kind of the sequence of where things happened, when they happened, where they happened. But when you look at Mark and Luke, sometimes they've got it in a whole different place. So it's another way of really studying what the Bible is trying to tell us. So let's just take one more quick one here.
I'm gonna.
Then
say
Sue's
goodbye
gonna
to
leave.
all of you. I'm sorry.
Sleep well.
Have a good day tomorrow.
Thank you.
So question 9. If we think of healing miracles as healing an illness rather than curing a disease, much like first century Mediterranean people did, then perhaps we can play at least some small part in affecting healing in those around us. Select one of the miracle stories in this lesson and prayerfully reflect on it. Does the woman in the story remind you of anyone, male or female, among your family or friends? What is the healing that person most needs in order to find meaning and support in his or her time of illness? What can you do to aid in that healing?
In those times, it had been very difficult, for women. I don't even know if they would feel comfortable talking woman to woman about things. The woman, I'm thinking of, the one that was hemorrhaging and stuff, being, by herself, can't be a part of, the community and kind of distance from everybody. And I would think they would have depression and mental health issues just like we have in our day. But to have that support that's so badly needed, is so important, which kind of is more healing than anything. I mean, if you have something like that, she can overcome a lot, to get her through the rest of it. It goes along with taking care of one another. That we try to do now for everybody that we can. But back then, and a lot of people too are so private now that you can't share things to get that support to open up and share your problems that you're having. I know my sister had a lot of mental health issues. She went through a rare blood condition and stuff like that. And she was isolated from a lot of people, and I think she did it herself, but we were trying to encourage her to mingle with people and things, but, and we did, but she just didn't know how. And I think back then, it's like, they were probably just isolated by themselves with what they were dealing with. I mean, you can have a cure for a disease, but the healing is what's needed to get that spiritual healing too, to get you through it. I think that's as important, if not even more. And not having a name that you can have as a woman, to be called, hey, you. Felt bad for that. I mean, just think of all those wonderful women in the Bible,
Nameless women.
nameless women.
Yeah, yeah. I have a friend, her name is Connie. And she's a little younger than me. And not long ago fell in I think in the house, and had a huge cut and had brain surgery and things like that. She's had back issues for some time prior to that, and still now. And she's recovered from that surgery. But we've been in touch, and she asked who my back surgeon was. I had back surgery in 2016. And she had gone to others and no success with whatever's going on. And I said, well, call and try and get in to see him. He's down at Twin Cities Spine, affiliated with Abbott Northwest. And so it took months to get in, but she did. And he can't necessarily fix her. He can help things not become worse. And he has explained to her the different maladies with her spine and some of the things she can do for it, surgery being the last resort. So I want to encourage her. I pray for her. And she has a name.
We talked about even the one woman with the one part story, being bent over. I had a great aunt that was just like that. She was Catherine, and I was named after her, except I'm Kathleen. But it was just so hard to see her, but she just went along her way and dragged everything behind her. It was just like, I have nothing to complain about. That one was just not going to stop. She just kept moving. It was just amazing. She lived, I think, until she was in her 70s. That's been about 35 years ago.
I had an uncle that he was my great uncle, and he looked like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And my daughter and one of my grandkids have scoliosis, and my daughter's husband, interestingly enough, he lived out in Oregon and she lived here. When he was 17, his mother noticed when he was bent over to brush his teeth how crooked his spine was, and she was a nurse. And at 17, he had 2 rods and 17 screws, and he just goes about his day. And so fortunately, there's something can be done now. Back then,
Yeah.
for yours and for my great uncle, there wasn't anything they could do, and it affected their lives so much. He never married. you know.
Yeah, my great aunt didn't either, and she had a hard time getting in the car, but my dad would always go pick her up. It was
Oh,
his aunt and stuff, and kind of lift her in and stuff, but you always come together for things. Yeah. It's so difficult.
right.
One of the things that, when we look at question 9 here, that probably became popular maybe back in the 70s was hospice.
Yeah,
Cause it used to be, right, you've got this disease, it's not curable. But hospice came along to where, okay, there's nothing medically that can be done anymore. But let's try to make this person as comfortable as possible. Let's deal with pain, but we're not gonna deal with any um, type of medication that's gonna treat the disease. But try to give the person some quality of life in their last days. To make them as comfortable as possible. And that, and when I read this, that's the first thing that came to mind is that it's really more that healing the emotional things and other things that the individual is dealing with, but not treating the illness or disease or sickness.
And they live a
compassion.
wonderful life. I mean, it just gives them
Mhm.
some kind of life, right?
Takes a special person to do that job.
Yes.
Because
Yes,
every person they pretty much come in contact eventually. You know, sometimes it's very short and sometimes it's
right.
a long time. But they're some unique, special people.
Yeah, like when Rosalind Carter died recently, she had been in hospice just a matter of a few days, and they talked about Jimmy Carter had been in hospice
Yeah.
since January.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So he's been in it for over a year, but so it's different situations that are people in, but it is a very beneficial thing, I think, that
Oh, it's wonderful.
very compassionate.
You know, I just heard on the news the other day, I think it's the state of Minnesota is looking at, some states already have it, you know. I don't know what it's called, the term to end of life that you can choose to.
euthanasia.
Yeah, and state of Minnesota is
Yeah.
kind of pushing for that. How does the church feel about that?
Oh, the church is very much against
I
it.
was
So,
gonna say, that's a
yeah,
no.
we're getting information all the time from the Minnesota Catholic Conference to contact our legislators. Fortunately, both for those that live in Ramsey, our state representative and state senator are opposed to it, but
Yeah, that surprised me. It's just- And I know my sisters have friends that drove to, or flew to Colorado, I think it is. She was in so much pain, she decided to go
Mhm.
to Colorado. Just. I
yeah,
think
because
it's
there are
hard.
states where it's legal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad.
What we pray for life from conception to natural death.
Right, right.
Abortion is not natural death. Euthanasia is not natural death. Or assisted suicide, as some call it. Capital punishment's not natural death. War is not natural death. There's a lot of things in our society that are not natural death, and unfortunately, some of them are becoming more and more acceptable. Just like abortion's becoming more acceptable. Church is very much opposed to all of that.
Mhm.
So at least we're consistent and,
Mhm.
in fact, I think it was, Cardinal Bernardine in Chicago that, called it the, seamless garment, the consistent ethic of life. We're consistent on respecting all life.
Why can't everybody
Mhm.
respect life? And you went to the Capitol. last weekend.
Yeah, and the most power, the most worthless speakers, that's my term, are when they have the politicians up there.
Yeah.
They get
Oh.
too political on it, but the most powerful speakers are somebody that has a personal story to tell. So some years there's been, in fact, one year there was a woman that had 2 or 3 abortions.
Oh, wow.
And now, well, at the time she spoke, very much regretted what she had done and just spoke
Those are
about
the
how
ones
it
that
affected
have to get-
her.
Well, he has to
But
deal
this
with
year it was a young girl, and where we were standing was where one of those big block things that's got statues on it.
that. Mhm,
So we couldn't see the speaker,
mhm.
we could hear them. But from her voice, she was probably still in high school,
Oh, my.
but she talked about when her mother was pregnant with her. Well, it was like kind of this miracle we talked about, that there was some malfunction with her, and doctors were telling the parents that, you know, she most likely is gonna be blind, she's gonna have this issue, she's gonna have that issue. Her chances of surviving beyond a certain age are, you know, pretty remote, and recommending an abortion, and her parents said, no, we're going to have this child, and we love this child as much as we can for as long as we have her. And she did not have any
Yeah.
significant issues of what the
Mm.
doctor said.
It's almost a
So,
miracle in
yeah,
itself.
yeah,
Mhm,
if,
Yeah, she was supposed to be
if my
here.
parents had listened to the doctor, I wouldn't be here. In fact, she actually testified before the Minnesota Senate last year when they were looking at one of the abortion bills. And one of those was the one where the born alive provision. So that if somebody is born alive, you have to do everything possible medically to
Mhm,
keep them alive.
mhm.
And it was the bill to where they would not have to do that. So this person was, if it was a botched abortion, and baby happened to be born alive, they wouldn't have to do anything to keep the baby alive. And same thing with conditions that this girl supposedly would have had. So she was a very powerful speaker before the state senate that,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm an example of
Right.
what can happen if you don't pass this bill, that
Mhm.
you have to do everything medically possible to keep us alive, because I'm here because at the time I was born, the doctors had to provide all that treatment.
So then there's doctors now that might be mandated to perform, right? I mean, in some, if they don't go by what they're supposed to be doing, you know, going through the process and they don't want to, what kind of a position does it put the doctors in?
Yeah, and that's where the church is always pushing for the right of conscience, so that laws can't mandate that somebody has to go against their conscience and perform some procedure that they're not.
Yeah, I hear it on the news once in a while and it's like, how can that be? Just-
And doctors take an oath.
Yeah, well, right, right. Yeah, and just keep the TV off.
Sometimes that's.
Open my Bible.
Yeah.
So any final thoughts, comments, questions on anything on this lesson, or anything we didn't talk about that you want to bring up?
Yes. On page 32, where it says the medical terminologies and then the definitions. I didn't quite totally understand that. And my friend, that's the teacher that I was showing this lesson to, she said, well, if you have an illness, she said, say, oh shucks, alcoholism. It's a disease, but she said it's an illness, and she said, but the healing for me is if I go to Al-Anon, which is exactly what I had in my marriage.
Yeah.
And I did go to Al-Anon for 4 years, and then adult children of alcoholics for another 2. And so that I could get cured or healed, so that I knew how to take care of my life and not get caught up in the alcoholism, and ultimately try to be helpful to him. So I was trying to figure out those 4 words and how they go together, and note taken that some are the Western world and some is the Near Eastern.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's talking about disease and curing, which are kind of what we look at now as opposed to illness and healing
Okay,
as to what the
okay,
time of Jesus would be the way of looking at it.
got it.
It kind of goes back to, again, the cultural differences that we talked about in the lesson last week, that in the time of Jesus and still some areas in the world now, it's more a relationship thing as opposed to individualistic and the expectations, as opposed to what you personally want is what you expect of you and stuff, so. And again, this would probably fit in a little bit with that idea of hospice as far as what we're dealing with and what we're treating and what we're trying to help the person with.
In part, my husband's second wife was Chinese. And she was quite young. But the system told her what kind of a job she was going to have. And told them, her family, her parents and sisters and grandmother, the system would tell them what they were
Yeah.
going to do or what they were going to be, even in our times now.
Now, when you look at in earlier days, somebody would go to work in some business company, plant or whatever, and they'd stay there their whole working career, where
Yep.
now people may be in 20 different jobs.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
China, it's like, all right, this is what we're gonna train you to do, and you're gonna do it the rest of your life.
Yep.
Or the rest of your working life.
And if you get caught with a Bible there, that's a no-no. She did have one hidden. But that's not approved.
Mhm.
We have freedom. In the process, we have
Yeah.
freedom.
So, anything else on this lesson?
What are we doing next week?
So next week, we get into John's gospel. We've had very little of John's gospel so far. The whole lesson is gonna be on the Samaritan woman. In John's gospel, so. Again. Look at the fact. Where. This event took place, the time of day it took place, and who was around.
Oh.
Those are. Some of my
Some
issues because
clues.
of that passion play that totally messed it up. One of they used to do this passion play out in South Dakota. Which we had been to a few times, and right after I was ordained, we were there with my in-laws. And my father-in-law was a Methodist minister, so I bought my ticket, and then he went up, said, we need 2 tickets, one for an adult, one for free pass for clergy. And I go, what's this free pass thing? Yeah, all clergy get a free pass. Oh,
Oh, my.
here's my ticket back and I have my
Yeah,
money back.
yeah. Oh,
But it's a very powerful story the way they do it, but at the crucifixion, it was raining. And I didn't even realize it was raining, sitting there
Yeah.
in the rain because it was just,
You were so drawn in.
yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
And there they were very faithful to what's in the
Mhm.
Gospels. They
I
didn't
have
bring
heard
in a lot
about
of
that
that
one.
outside
Yeah.
stuff that,
And then the one at Oberammergau.
Yep.
Where the whole city every 10 years.
all right, so let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our
Our
Father,
Father,
who art
art
in
in
heaven,
heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy
Thy
kingdom
kingdom
come,
come,
thy will be done, on
on
earth
earth
as it is in heaven. Give
Give
us this day our daily bread, and
forgive us our trespasses,
as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation. but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thank you all. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Enjoy this very cold
Yeah, balmy weather.
Just